Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Jeremy Smith and Mohammed Ali. Here's a quick bit of advice to any sportsman thinking of doing this in the next few weeks. Do not take a selfie with Drake. That curse struck again on Sunday night, but who did prove that it was God's plan to succeed, and who will be telling their friends to just hold on as they're coming home soon? Less music puns and more football after the latest headlines. On Friday, Dijon picked up another valuable point at home to Amiens, but the game was marred by racist chanting by home spectators as Amiens captain Prince Guano, who spoke wonderfully after the game about the situation. Elsewhere, Nantes compounded the misery on outgoing Lyon manager Bruno Genesio as they won 2-1 against Lyon. Genesio will now leave in the summer, but the club are now sweating over Champions League qualification. On Saturday, Marseille got back to winning ways with a 2-1 win over Nîmes, with all three goals coming in the final 20 minutes, while Guingamp earned a point in an entertaining 3-all draw with Strasbourg, at least lifts them off the bottom spot. That honour goes to Cole, who slips back to the basement thanks to Jeff Ryan Adelaide's goal for Angers, as Monaco were held to a goalless draw at home to Reims. Montpellier gave themselves a boost in the chase for European football on Sunday as they won 2-1 at home to Toulouse. But both Nice and Rennes put dints in their own charges as neither could break the deadlock at Roseanne Park. Saint-Etienne reduced the gap to rivals Lyon to just 3 points after an impressive 3-0 win over Bordeaux, which included a double from fullback Mathieu Debuchy. And in the final game of the weekend, Lille defended home court and delayed PSG's title celebrations by at least a few days as they won 5-1. Goalscorer Juan Bernat saw red before Doug Ryan riot, with 4 different players finding the net alongside a Thomas Meunier own goal. And that's all for now. But to keep up to date with all the news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week where ideally we never really want to start, and that is the crowd trouble we saw in Dijon. They about midway through the game, as they were taking a corner, the home side were actually taking a corner. Some offensive chants were made to Amiens captain Prince Guano, who obviously was distraught by this. Stopped the game for several minutes as he tried to speak to the crowd, and spoke wonderfully afterwards as well, Mo. It's ugly scenes again at Dijon. It sort of harks back to, I think it was last season they did against Mario Balotelli while he was at Nice as well. So it's not a first occurrence from that specific club, although the club have condemned it and even threatened legal action against one of the perpetrators at least. But ugly scenes again, and something that we should have obviously condemn, but more than that, if it's a repeat offence for Dijon, and this can't keep happening.
No, you're right. It's not the first occurrence, and the way things have been going, especially across Europe, European football in the last couple of weeks, you think that it's not going to be the last either. It's just, it's something that needs to be stamped out. I thought Guana did, a very good job. He's very eloquent in his actions on Friday, but it's obviously clearly something that needs to be stamped out. And well, I'm sure the players and the majority of fans are not responsible for the actions of a small minority, but there has to be, zero tolerance approach. There has to be a tough line drawn at some point because it's a scourge and it's something that needs to be stamped out and ensured, something that will never happen again on a football pitch. But I don't really know what the league and what the disciplinary action will be. We talk about racism initiatives, players that should stay on the field and just report something to the referee. But I definitely support Guano in the fact that he saw it fit to sort of temporarily stop the game. But if it were down to me, and what I'd like to see is players simply walk off. It's tantamount to a hostile work environment in that sort of situation. But what I would like to see is that clubs or clubs first of all running campaigns among their own fans to say, well, if you do behave badly in a football stadium, be it racism, be it homophobia, or what we saw a couple of seasons ago in Lyon, for example, against women. Something that needs to be stamped out at the club level, and the league needs to take a hard line against it.
Yeah, and that's where the sort of at least the next stage of this comes in, and we'll talk about that in the moment. But just specifically, Guano as well, who, like we've already said, spoke excellently on this. Really, it takes sometimes someone with that kind of wider understanding, I suppose, of political issues that come to this, because it's obviously not just football that attracts this. It seems to be a little bit, like Mo said, systematic in wider society and in different countries as well. I'm thinking Cagliari, I think it was about a week and a half ago against Moise Ken, and the amount of, at least on social media, the amount of issues we've seen in English football as well. But specifically, Guano was excellent afterwards and spoke like I think much better than a real captain and someone in those circumstances usually does, because it can be so affecting. So he deserves a real doff of the cap for being a real leader here.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen, but it does feel like maybe this could be the start of some kind of change in attitudes. He even said in an interview today that when sort of asked about that kind of thing in the past, he had no idea how he would have reacted, or how he was going to react if the situation ever happened to him. I think in the past, certainly the recent incidents, Moise Kean, as you said, and Sterling, not so much of the Chelsea incidents that obviously we're not allowed to talk about because apparently there's no racism in English football, but against Montenegro, they both kind of, in a way, reacted in the best way possible by sort of scoring and then kind of staring out the people who'd just been insulting them. Guano, I think, did something that I'm not sure that we've seen before. First of all, he did manage to get the game stopped for 6 minutes or so and get all 22 players kind of to back him by stopping the game. But I think more importantly, the way he spoke. And it's not to say that there's a better or worse way to react, because in exactly the same way, I'm in absolutely no position to say how someone should react in that situation. But the way that he spoke so eloquently, so calmly, actually in a way sort of feeling sorry for and wanting to educate the one person. Maybe it would have been different if it had been sort of several dozen people, but the fact that it was just one person and he was kind of talking about forgiveness and talking about how it's that person who needs, as I said, needs educating, and that in a way he said, I don't condemn that person, I condemn racism. And possibly it's just a different way for the authorities to think about it. And hopefully we'll see a sea change. The problem is I'm not sure how you do deal with it. In a way, this kind of highlights the problem when you talk about fines or stopping matches or that kind of thing. The worry is that it could be one person sort of stopping it for 39,999 other people, for example. And I mean, again, I just don't know. Maybe that is the right thing to do. Maybe a lot of sort of innocent people have to kind of not be punished, but I guess penalised because of the actions of a few. You force something to change. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly the way that Guano dealt with it, I think, was a new way, because I think it made an important point that I don't know. I mean, we know every time when we see how hurt the footballers are when they receive this kind of abuse. Of course, everyone knows they're footballers with feelings, but I think sometimes unfairly footballers are still painted as not the most educated or eloquent people. And for him to come out and basically embarrass the authorities by acting much better than they ever do. There's been a lot on Twitter today about how the Italian press has been sort of obsessing about some little spat with Bakayoko and Genesio and Lazio players at at the end of the match yesterday, and that they're sort of more horrified by that than anything that happened to Keane a couple of weeks ago. The fact that Guano is acting better in the face of being the direct victim of racism than any of the authorities, whether it's nationally or UEFA or FIFA, hopefully will shame some of those authorities into sort of no longer paying lip service and actually coming up with a decent set of possible solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly the right thing, Jez. But while longer term projects should obviously be looked into, and there's a lot of longer term, hopefully, plans in place from clubs and from leagues and such, whether they are fully in place or not, it remains to be seen. But hopefully they've got something they're working on. But I suppose the worry for 99% of Dijon fans, Mo, is the short-term effect of this, because like we've mentioned, this is obviously not the first time the club's been in a little bit of trouble for this. Would a stadium ban be, for these last few home games, be enough, or might they even be risking potentially? I know it's maybe severe on the club, but even a points deduction in this regard, because it's clearly not just their first offence either.
I mean, yeah, like you said, there's no one right answer, and it would be, a tough pill to swallow. 99.9% of fans have done nothing wrong, and on both occasions have come to support their club home and away, relatively well. But there needs to be, I think, a zero tolerance approach. There needs to be a point where instead of fancy slogans and sort of a little bit of inaction, there needs to be a tough line when it comes to this sort of behaving the same way that hooliganism, at one point had been sort of evaporated. Well, it had to evaporate in England. When it obviously racism it's a scourge now, not just in French football but across Europe. I think a points deduction probably might be a bit too far, but a stadium ban would definitely, I think, would force the club to sort of bring their own fans into line to ensure that the majority are not affected in future.
Yeah, I think that not just the FFF and other nations around Europe, but UEFA and FIFA themselves need to have a long look at this, a long look at how much money they spend this. Because I mean, there was the reports early this week, obviously in England, that the club spent 427 million on agents' fees and around about 427,000 overall for Kick It Out to help out the fight against racism. And maybe we need to invest more in terms of getting more people on the ground. Let's get Kick It Out to every club in England. Let's have a similar service to every club in Europe. Let's have them get into the wider communities. Let's speak to people. Let's speak about the effects of how racism has on minorities and homophobia and the likes. Let's use football and the vast money that a lot of these places do, especially the governing bodies have, to educate those and get out in the communities and work together and do something like that. And yes, it might be a bit more. Some people may claim it's a bit hierarchy of me, but football certainly has the money more than most businesses and most governments even, really, to try and affect a change. And what a positive that could be if only they could actually go about and do it for once. But may we rest in hope more than anything, I think, at the moment, unfortunately. On to football matters now, really, and I'm sure both of you are rubbing your hands together to talk about Paris Saint-Germain's meltdown, really, on Sunday night. And I'll start with yourself, Jez. It was an interesting game, really, that set up quite nicely with the 1-1 scoreline about 20 minutes in, and then Juan Bernat got himself sent off in somewhat controversial standards. But regardless of that, and regardless of the injuries, really, that Paris Saint-Germain have been carrying, which Tuchel mentioned after the game, it was a real implosion from them, and much like Mbappe said, a real lack of character.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by sort of giving the mitigating circumstances. You pretty much covered them there. Bernat, personally, seems to be the huge minority, if that makes sense. But I actually thought it was genuinely a harsh sending off. I'm not even convinced it was a foul. I'm not convinced it was a clear goal scoring opportunity either. But and yes, they had injuries before the match and they had two during the match. But it's PSG. If there's issues with the depth of squad, that's entirely their own problem. The players they brought on, they were youngsters, but they're still talented players. Maybe there should be more questioning of some of Tuchel's sort of tactics, playing Alves again as a striker, playing a very short, albeit a defender, but a very short one, centre back, that kind of thing. Everyone's sort of glossing over those issues. And to be fair to them, as usual, after their annual Champions League elimination, they are sleepwalking through the rest of the season, and you can understand why it's a little bit difficult to lift themselves. But all that said, the way they capitulated in the second half, as Mbappe pointed out, is just not good enough, and it is. He called it foot professional, and it is. Any sort of self-respecting professional should not be giving up like that. I know I'm on dangerous ground after Brighton, that's why I this week as well. But they should have that kind of professional pride, even if it doesn't affect their title chances. You shouldn't want to be ever conceding 5, certainly not to your closest rivals this season, even if they are sort of 20 points behind. And I think that, Tuchel kind of entirely dismissed what Mbappe said, but I think there was a lot of truth to it. And actually, even the fact that Tugari actually pointed out today that everyone in the club, whether it's Enrique or Khalefi or Tuchel or the players or the fans, everyone seems to have completely different theories for why they got nuts out of the Champions League, why they capitulated yesterday, why there's the same problems happen year after year. And the fact that they all have different views and they don't seem to be speaking to each other and they all have different people to blame, all of this, I think, was just indicative of what's going on there. And obviously, they are very, very close to being a very, very good, all-conquering team. Obviously, they are on the national stage. But until they sort out all these problems, which, frankly, at times do look amateurish, then I just can't see how they can ever take that next step and be proper Champions League contenders. And they're really not far away, but the mistakes that they're making or the issues that they're not addressing while they're having all these internal politics, as I said, I find them, it's a bit embarrassing, and it wouldn't take a huge step to sort them out, but no one seems to want to. There's such a huge clash of egos at every level of the club that it feels like this is never going to be, or certainly not in the near future, going to be sorted out.
Yeah, and it's all bubbling under the surface, and starting with something that at least the players were pretty united on Sunday, and the managers and the El Khalifi as well was the refereeing performance, Mo. He was also the referee when they ended up losing to Guingamp on penalties in the Coupe de la Ligue as well, much as Mbappe mentioned. On the contrary to Jez, I definitely think it's a red card in terms of a goal scoring opportunity, and I don't think I've ever had to hold or pull a shirt of a player to get back to him. It's one of those a little bit silly ones, and in all honesty, a lot of the decisions on VAR looked right to me as well in full time. Is this just sort of the posturing of a team that were heavily beaten and trying to find an excuse?
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree with nearly every point that Jez made. I also thought it was a penalty because purely for the fact that if you not a penalty, a red card, for the fact that if you stick your hands out to bring down a player, you are going to put yourself in a position where that sort of thing will happen. It's not a case of where we just bumped into each other, I lightly touched him. If you put your hand out and the player goes on to fall, no matter how easily, you've given the referee a decision to make where it wasn't necessary to be in that position in the first place.
I agree with that. I agree with it. It's stupid to make the referee make a decision, but it's just to me that's not the same as it being foul.
Yeah. Again, one can easily make the case of the player falling down easily, or if it was light, or if it was, But then again, that's the game, and that's the way that in the end, it's self-inflicted. It's
exactly. I'm certainly not saying that's something that anyone at PSG is entitled to fall back on and moan about.
Absolutely, and it's not just the red cards. The manner of the defeat. It's the complaints about the referee as well. It's all self-inflicted. I 100% agree with Mbappe, who most of the time appears to be more eloquent than his teammates who have been in Paris for a longer number of years than him. It's that, you know, there's a way to lose. There's a way to lose, and there's a way to manage the game if things are not going against you. You know, PSG, no matter how richly assembled they are not going to win every game as much as they like to. If last night, you know, again, mitigating circumstances where they lost 3 of their 5 defenders on the field after half an hour, playing with 10 men against a very vibrant Lille side away from home as well. It's not going to be the end of the world if they were to go on to lose the game, but definitely the game control went absolutely out the window. Honestly, when Lille stuck in the third, I really thought at that point it might end 6-1, and they did end up getting 5 in the end. And just complaining about the referee is distracting. It's distracting from their poor performance, sort of deflecting. I saw last night a lot of excuses, which for a team who's still after that, you know, it was in the end, you know, probably a one-off. They're still 17 points ahead. They're still, you know, going to wrap up the league title in about 48 hours. Yes, the team, the team is very thinly spread at the moment. Yes, they might have not liked the referee performance, but to complain about the referee after losing to, you know, in the Coupe de la Ligue against Guingamp, to the team who absolutely, you know, ranked bottom of the league table as well. Again, it's all self-inflicted. It's just the mentality, that sort of mentality, that's really going to deprive them of their bigger objectives, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting point that Tuchel made, especially because he was very fiery yet again after the press conference afterwards, Jez, was that yes, they had 1 man less on the bench and they had plenty of good players fit, but 2 players that he would have quite liked to have played were, he's mentioned, is Adrien Rabiot and Lassana Diarra, that obviously for other circumstances haven't played, and obviously in Diarra's case he's ended up retiring in the end. But it was almost a really big statement of intent from the manager, wasn't he? He's ready to have a look at how they can improve in the summer, because he's fully aware of the misgivings we've talked about all season, and he's clearly trying to send a message to El Khalifi to say, trust me, and with these are the things that we need to fix, and get me the tools to do it.
Yeah, when he first spoke, I thought it just sounded absolutely ridiculous. And then, sort of, the more you think about it, the more you think, if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, he knew exactly what he was doing. It was a very good time to make a very strong point to those above him that they need to invest. I mean, the problem is that it's not that they haven't invested in the past, they've just invested very, very stupidly. And again, let petty politics, in the case of Rabiot, affect the team. You know, the fact that they can't fill a bench, again, I don't know if he's making a point or there genuinely aren't enough players around, but as I said earlier, if there aren't players around, it's as a result of 2 or 3 years of spending ridiculous amounts on past-it players, or players who aren't past-it but bring as many cons to the team as pros, when you could buy a very, very good squad with the amount spent on one certain player, for example. So, yeah, if he was using this to make a point, then actually he's very, very clever of him, very well played. And I mean, I just don't think there's any way to hide it anymore. They have to change their policy in some way in the summer. I think they have to get rid of a lot of the, I was going to say dead weight. They're not dead weight, but there's players there who are kind of serial losers. They're very talented players, but you have to say that they're tainted by the fact that they have been in every single Champions League capitulation that PSG have experienced recently. There's other players who, as I said, for all that they bring to the team, I think they take a lot away from it as well. And I've said it before, for me, the biggest problem in that club is not Enrique, it's not Tuchel, it's not the players, it's El Khalifi. But he's not going anywhere, so he needs to wise up. And at the moment, for all that I think he's sounded ridiculous at times in the last couple of weeks. I thought he overdid the thing about having it last week. I thought he overdid the excuses last night. I do think Tuchel is, after Mbappe, is the biggest asset of the club now. And if they don't back him in the summer, I could see him walking.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing I really like about Tuchel is he will stand by his convictions, and if there's no movement in the summer, he'll know that his reputation is not necessarily tarnished by this time at PSG, and he would walk into another top European job. I sort of, it feels a little bit immaterial saying that in midweek Paris Saint-Germain are going to face Nantes. Probably another point will at least do it in all likelihood 3, and then this is a little bit immaterial because they are champions. But let's give a spotlight to Lille, Mo, because they, especially in the second half, were pretty terrific as well. As much as PSG allowed them to be, they have to still seize on that opportunity, and by Jove, did they really? But I suppose the shame about this team is it's in all likelihood, and many of them mentioned before the game that 4 or 5 players are probably going to go in the summer, help balance the books. It's going to be a real recovery for them because they're going to have not just money to pay what we're worried about the DNCG, but even use that money to spend and then try and rebuild again. But it's been a really special team this season, and Galtier's done an excellent job with a number of players who are going to go on to do bigger and better things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a bit of a shame that after really sort of seeing how great this team could go last night, it's almost already at the end of the cycle, where with only 6 games to go this season. They've done fantastically well. I actually will admit that I thought even as late as February there's still sort of a team that are quite resembling like a flash in the pan, that they would be caught up certainly by Lyon, if not OM, and they have been relatively lucky, but the front 3, Ikone, Bamba, and Pepe have just been absolutely fantastic. Their pace, especially in the final third, really has dragged not just the PSG, but also some of the other top teams this season as well. Galtier, I think, arguably manager of the year for me. I noticed I was in Marseille when they played Lille last year and won 5-1, and Galtier was sort of very full on after that game, sort of lamenting just how the team were not able to follow his instructions, how he was not able to replicate the tactics that he wanted, and that the result was a free-for-all in their defensive style and their inability to string a couple of attacks together. But less than 12 months on, they really are the form team in France, and so many vibrant young players. It looks like the initial plan that they had has fostered into something very, very special. And I look forward to seeing what they could do in a close summer, especially with the funds that they have, and with Luis Campos being able to perhaps pick out a couple more gems from maybe the lower divisions in France or from across Europe and Portugal or somewhere else, and seeing who will be the next sort of key player for them next season. Of course, they've still got the Champions League. Very likely that they will qualify for this one, and basically a big job next year. But Galtier absolutely deserves, I think, to have a Champions League shot.
And that's going to, like we say, the unfortunate thing about them not just obviously losing some of these players, but it's great that they can try and reinvest some of it once they've sort of appease the tax man is maybe the best way of saying it. But then, like you say, it's striking lucky again. We've seen Monaco, we've seen I suppose Lyon can lean on a bit more on the academy, and other teams of that ilk try and do it again, and it's so difficult, and especially with Champions League coming up as well, and unless something absolutely dramatic comes, automatic Champions League place as well, it's going to make it even more difficult for what is already pretty small squad, really. If it's going to get thin and then try and grow out again, it's going to be even tougher. On to Lyon, because the big news coming out from there is almost pretty much immediately after the game. They mentioned that Bruno Genesio will not be renewing his contract, as pretty much expected, really, on that one. Jez, it's not the most surprising news, but at least we've had confirmation now, and they're going to start their search for a new manager. But they went out on Friday night on Saturday, and pulled a bit of an egg, really, to be fair, against a side that we've mentioned how poor they've been in the second half of the season, and how they've just been a little bit uninteresting, and Lyon just allowed them sort of to walk into a result. I know it's obviously an excellent free kick in the end, but they never really troubled, not for great periods of time. And it's sort of symptomatic of Genesio's whole reign at the club, really.
Yeah, we talk about this pretty much every week, and again, I suppose it depends on your point of view whether it's Genesio's fault or the players' fault. At this stage, whereas for a lot of points during the season, I think it is up for a debate between those two. At this stage, I'm sorry, but I really think that the fans, to an extent, and especially Olas, have to share some of the blame as well. Whether Genesio is a good coach or not, I think at least until the end of the season, whatever was going on in private, he had to be publicly backed. And Olas usually, I think, is a savvy operator when it comes to comms, but I just think he scored a massive own goal this time. The whole situation became so farcical, sort of confirming him in his post, and then 3 days later, pretty much totally backtracking. It sounds like, at least from everything that's coming out of the club, that this was done on Genesio's terms, which is something, at least, unless it's just Lyon sort of now trying to make the best of a bad situation. But whether it's on his terms or not, and whether you rate him as a coach or not, I think that the way he's been treated over a couple of years by fans, and certainly over the last few months by his president as well, I just think is practically inhumane. And if anyone, I think deserves a bit of a break. A break as in not good luck, but time off in a good way. I think it's him. I think the extra pressure that he's been under, I just think has been unfair, and the fact that it's sort of been caused by people who should be on his side and should be backing him is pretty sad. And then on the playing side, there's rumours of a couple of fights. I tend to think no smoke without fire. Those stories must have come from somewhere. Again, I think Lyon just can't wait for the summer to come, and they're going to have to really look at a few players there. I think Fekir just. It's funny, there was a Liverpool fan recently who wrote an article about how Fekir is still fantastic and everyone's taking their eye off the ball. I really think he's had a poor season overall. And Ndombele, no one knows if he's got a bad attitude or he's just a little bit too relaxed for his own good, but I think his mind's elsewhere. Depay, about him. Aouar apparently is sort of, there were stories yesterday that Aouar resents Genesio since he wasn't played against Barcelona, which, I mean, you understand the frustration, but a kid like that starting off in his career, I don't think should be throwing strops like that. Apparently there's a few players who are annoyed that Fekir's brother may or may not have been promoted above more deserving players into the first team squad just to please Fekir and try to get some form out of him. There's lots of issues there, and I think some of them could be sorted out just by Genesio, Fekir and Ndombele leaving in the summer. But that also leaves 3 or 4 big voids that Olas is going to have to really get his mojo back to make sure that they're well filled again.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing for Genesio really throughout his tenure, really, which ebbed and flowed, Mo. I mean, he had some really great moments. Obviously, succeeding to get into the Champions League knockout stages was a big plus for them this season. They competed on multiple fronts several times, just never really quite getting to that stage. Had some great results against Paris Saint-Germain as well, but the fans never really quite took to him at any point, really. Even as soon as he replaced Hubert Fournier, they weren't ever really certain on him. Olas has sort of not really helped, like Jess said, in the last few months with a in and out sort of contract talks as well. And it seems like the players have sort of given in this season as well, which is possibly the death now. But how do you see Genesio's time in charge? Is it one where Lyon did what they could with the talent they had, or is it a situation where, much like what the fans may say, is that maybe he could have got a little bit more out of this team?
Well, it's hard to say because, first of all, I've seen a couple of Lyon fans on Twitter sort of talk about like a lost era. 3.5 years lost because of having Bruno Genesio as head coach. But when you look at the results on the field, they finished second, third, and fourth over and they're on course to finish third again. So, podium 3 times out of 4 seasons since 2015, since Genesio has been head coach. That's not a bad record at all. He's qualified for the Champions League each and every year. Sure, given the team that they've hired and the array of young talent they've had at one point, with Lacazette initially, through Fekir, through Aouar, and then Dombele and Ferland Mendy over the last 18 months, 2 years. There have been several missed occasions, but the same can be said of Marseille and Monaco, their competitors as well. He has secured fantastic results. The Champions League this year, and in Champions League this year, and in the league against Paris Saint-Germain, the home. Marseille have never gotten so much more than a point in his period as head coach. They've had some fantastic results. I think claims that he has been a very poor manager for Lyon are greatly over-exaggerated for me. As much as obviously I'd want him to stay. Of course, there are better talents in the managerial world, but I think most of the blame should lie at the door of the chairman, Jean-Michel Aulas. They have got a budget of 200 million euros plus, maybe pushing 250. He should back the manager with more funds to secure the talents that are required to reach their objectives. That hasn't come. He hasn't really supported Genesio in the last year. He had initially. Over the last year with the, will he stay, will he go, and the in-out contract talks that have, sort of serviced over the past 2 months have undermined the relationship, I think, between the manager and the team. The team should be doing better themselves. There's no reason why, and the problem that I find with Lyon is that they routinely do well against teams of a similar caliber or better, but then a couple of days later are unable to perform against teams that are ranked from say the bottom 5 in Liga. You've seen several times this season where they've matched Manchester City, they've held Barcelona, they've beaten PSG, they've really overruled Marseille. When the big occasion comes, they really do seem to, hit their foot on the pedal. And then, against Angers, against Caen, for example, the team unravel. I don't know what the mentality of the team might be. I don't know how much of that can be placed on Genesio. But that's just a problem that's been plaguing the club. And Aulas, obviously, I think he is arguably the greatest chairman in French football, what he's done over 25 years. I think also he's become pretty stale and pretty aloof, with regards to how he runs the team. I don't see personally what a new manager could bring, especially one that does come from outside of France.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we'll turn to in a moment. I just wanted to mention for myself really on Genesio's time is I think he'd been okay. I think what was sort of the death knell for him was this summer actually. I think the fact that the Nabil Fekir deal fell through was sort of come back to bite him a little bit, really, unfortunately. I think that the plan, much like we mentioned in the summer, was probably for Fekir to move on, to Aouar to move into that position, and Toussaint remain in midfield. And instead, he's had to try and shoehorn both and Dombele and Aouar into the team more often than not, and it's cost them, and both in Toussaint's form and also in the club's ability to have someone shield in front of the defence that was struggling. And it has been a little bit better this season, but has still struggled really. And the fact that that's happened, and then you add in the absurdity of Fekir's younger brother, especially if he's not ready, being called up, and Aouar's attitude after being dropped for the Barcelona game. I mean, I hate when players are like that, because that's a real indictment of your own teammates as well, to say that he is inferior to you. That's not fair on your teammates. You're not putting the belief in them to go out there and pull. But the attention really turns, Jez, to who will replace him, really. And there's a number of candidates you can pull out of a hat, but many you might think are maybe a little bit inexperienced. But the last couple of managers that Lyon have gone for, I mean, Hubert Fournier was doing his things at Reims before heading to Lyon, and Genesio obviously a reserve manager before his time with the club. Where do you think what direction they go in next? Is it blockbuster signing, much like Olas has alluded to in maybe a Jose Mourinho or a Rafa Benitez maybe, or do you think maybe he plunders some of these excellent young managers behind Liga?
I don't think he's going to go the way that he's gone the last couple of times and sort of promote from within. I think maybe he's learned from the Genesio experience. I think there were some Lyon fans that kind of had it in for Genesio from the start because of that, because sort of Fournier was an ex-Lyon player, so they kind of favoured him in that selection process, and then Genesio was promoted from within. And I think people were tainted by the fact that he was sort of part of Fournier's staff anyway. So I think maybe he's learned his lesson from that, and I think possibly to get the fans back on side, he is going to need to go with a bigger signing. I can't see Mourinho happening for the reasons they said, for the money side and for the fact that I know United did it as well, but I just think Mourinho's ethos goes so against the Lyon ethos of sort of trying to play decent football and trying to put through youths that I'm not sure I could see that working. Benitez, I think, is a possibility. I think that would sort of fit quite well in terms of the sort of reputation of the coach, and the fact that he may well be looking to move on from Newcastle as well. I suppose a lot of it depends on how much you believe when Ola said that he would really prefer to have someone who speaks French and knows Ligue 1. There's talk of Vieira, but I'm sure he's going to stay at Nice for at least another season. Blanc, we spoke, I think, last week. I've got quite a few sort of reservations about him. The name that came up and may be difficult because he's currently mid-season and would probably be quite expensive to recruit. But I think Gallardo would be a really good appointment if they could get him. He knows Ligue 1, he's played for Monaco and PSG, presumably because of that. He can speak French. I was going to have a dig at Danny Alves, who can't speak French at all. I think Gallardo is just the sort of right balance of being a successful young manager who's not necessarily absolutely stellar, so possibly won't break the bank, who still has got things to prove, but certainly has got a hell of a lot of ability, who, as I said, has got that little French connection. I don't know that the Lyon fans would necessarily be happy, actually, maybe Vieira aside, with any other French manager right now. So I don't think there's a massive choice out there for him, depending on sort of what happens with other managers around Europe in the summer. So yeah, I think it would probably be quite a short list. But Gallardo and Benitez, although I still think Benitez is a pretty negative manager as well. I think they would possibly be the choices that maybe would excite Lyon fans the most.
Mo, if say you were in the shoes of Jean-Michel Aulas, and heaven forbid you're never in that position, at least anyway, but what would your choice of manager be for Lyon?
Well, it will be a manager who's obviously forward-thinking, able to, who knows the league. I think what is very, very important is you have a manager who is able to understand sort of the intricacies of French football and how to set up a game system that, enables his side to be able to sort of manage the games and be able to pick up as many points. Obviously, there are very different styles of football in France. There are, especially at the low end of the table, opponents who like to sit deep and defend for quite a long period of the game. So a manager who knows the league, who's relatively successful, but able to work with what he's got. Because outside of Paris and formerly Monaco, managers do not have massive budgets to work on, and I don't think that this would be not be the case at Lyon next season. So, like Jez has just said, Marcelo Gallardo is, I think, a very interesting proposition. Laurent Blanc, I think, even though he might not be the favourites, would be a very interesting choice because of his record in Liga across two other major clubs, and how he has fared domestically in both. Especially the next manager of Lyon will have a fine array of young talent to work with, and depending on who leaves this summer, a decent budget. So it's just about getting the right personnel in to take advantage of that. And if they do make the right choice, and Olas has relatively so, perhaps not over the last 7-8 years, not since Claude Puel maybe. Before that he's made the right call, and I think that this time you just need maybe maybe a radical approach might work, but at the end, above all, somebody that knows Liga pretty well would be a great start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it might be even Laurent Blanc, but I would like to see a left field appointment, maybe someone who's currently in Liga and pulling up trees, a Thierry Loret, maybe a little bit early for sort of a David Guillon, but Loret especially, two great stints at Gaslight where he almost did the unthinkable, and at Strasbourg where he's at least done what Lyon have not done in a little while, at least, and won a trophy. So at least he has that kind of experience, and I'm sure the players are very much on his side as well. On to our final topic tonight, and I suppose we can't really ever invite Mo on without talking a little bit of Marseille. And they got back to winning ways, at least, at the weekend, Mo, but it's been a pretty tough 2019. They had that horrible stint between November and February time where they really couldn't buy a win, and just as they were getting back on track, a couple of losses pulled them out again. Champions League looks to just be about beyond them, really, even though points gap isn't absolutely massive now, at least anyway. It's only a sort of 5-point gap to Lyon, but obviously they would have to overhaul Saint-Etienne as well. Although at least it looks favourable for a Europa League spot. That's not quite the sort of level that we wanted this season, and worrying signs, at least anyway, for potentially the future, and players probably a big overall in the summer looking as well.
No, you're right. Personally, Lyon's willingness to sort of throw away the Champions League has Marseille's hopes just about still on life support. But obviously, it had the last 10 days gone the right way in the games against Angers, especially Angers. Losing 2 goals at home through penalties is quite unforgivable. And had they managed to at least get a point at Bordeaux, the gap would have been 2, with still Lyon to come at the Velodrome next month. It would have set it up for a showdown. But I think we can more or less kiss it goodbye, if not for the fact that some players are sort of, including Florian Thauvin among them, have sort of given up, with the notion that even if Marseille did do the unthinkable and qualify for the Champions League, what would the club do? Because they haven't really challenged anybody that is at a similar level or above for quite a while now. And once you think of what OM had achieved last year with a very thin squad, more or less still, most of the squad still standing from the really uninspiring 2016-17 season, that managed to still play 64 games and go to European final, how much of a step back this season has been. And because of that, and because of perhaps, I think Rudy Garcia has perhaps run out of ideas, this I think will result in a very difficult summer where OM will return to a period quite similar to 2013, 2014, where they would have to sell before they can buy players. Experienced players will leave, and will be replaced by young, relatively cheap buys, and then the cycle will begin where they will not be good enough to qualify the Champions League, and then so on and so forth. I think that last summer was a very critical juncture for OM looking back, where Frank McCourt, for all his critics, has delivered on what he promised. He promised to set some for OM to use. I think his mistake is trusting the people with his investment, because they've turned out to make some very, very poor decisions. And when that money well dries up, he will be relying on OM to be self-sustainable And wishful was that for that to be in the Champions League, where the riches will more than cover a significant proportion of OM's budgets. With no Champions League, signals a very, very difficult summer to come for OM.
Yeah, very quickly, sort of on the sort of higher up situation as well, because some questions, at least anyway, of Rudy Garcia. Does he stay this summer as well? I know there's a lot of interest in sort of, well, I suppose not interest in from clubs, but in departing players such as maybe Payet's time for moving on, and the ilk and a couple of older players moving on. But is Rudy Garcia definitely going to be the coach next season? Is there any question about his leadership with the team?
Well, the idea is that if he could not get the Champions League this season, he would have to depart. And I think after the debacle of the winter, where OM lost, I think was it 14 of their 20 games over the winter, that he would just sort of tie things over till the end of the year, and then will be turfed. But this somehow stupid decision of giving him a new contract in October, where things weren't going well anyway, has sort of meant that OM will have to spend quite a bit to get rid of him, and I think that's what's led to some indecision of whether it will be the right idea to let him go. But the fact of the matter is that it would be, come the summer, it would be 2.5 years, just shy of 3 years that he's been out at OM. Last season had been a magnificent achievement. And there had been occasions where his coaching had actually worked, where OM, I think Jez would agree with this, they did come back from positions where they were relatively outplayed, but still somehow got a point. You'll see the quality of the league last year, where OM finished fourth with 77 points, but would do well to finish third with just 65 this time round. It's he, in my view, I think he should be kicked out. I think there needs to be new leadership, not just at the managerial level, but also the sporting director level, because some of the transfers have just not worked. The thinking behind, where OM needs to be and how it can recover as a team back to, its former glory. Some of the thinking behind that is quite muddled. We've seen initially transfers for players over 30 for significant sums. There are players who are still on significant sums who have absolutely not performed and have been left on the bench, who themselves are wondering what they are doing. And even key players at OM, like Florent Thauvin, as much as he's been great for OM, he is not perennially liked across Europe. So I don't think his value will do much to earn OM a nice budget next season. So I think that there needs to be a complete change to ensure that a new body of personnel is able to meet those challenges that will come at the summer.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing. And like you say, it's funny that Super Zureta was linked with Arsenal, really. I'm pretty sure a lot of OM fans would be like, please take him off our hands more than anything. But very, very quickly, just on the game that happened on the weekend, really, Marseille did win 2-1 in the end. But again, it was a little bit of a war of attrition. It took them a while to get in front. They had 2 goals disallowed for VAR, but eventually got themselves a 2-goal lead. But squandered it with a penalty for one, and looked like they tried to throw it away for a second, had VAR not intervened and decided that Kamara had been fouled before handling the ball. It seems like the only problem with OM at the moment is not necessarily opponents, but themselves shooting themselves in the foot.
I mean, just on this weekend's match, I'd say is a little bit of both. I think Marseille had their chances earlier on. I think Radonjic had a good one. Gustavo, Balotelli had a couple of good snapshots. And Nîmes, by their own admission, didn't really start playing until they were 2-0 down. I wonder if, in a way, Marseille were a little bit annoyed that having brought back some of those older players that have been benched, they actually, a few of them actually performed quite well, and sort of maybe had they sort of crashed and burned, having been put back in the first team, maybe it would have sort of strengthened everyone's resolve to get rid of them in the summer. But yeah, it's true that there is still an element of shooting themselves in the foot. I think I read that they've given away 11 penalties now. It's 4 in the last 3 games, and I have to say that I thought Sarr was extremely lucky in the last minute. For me, there was no foul there, and I think that should have been a second penalty, and that would have been the second time in a week or 2 weeks that they've given away the 2 penalties. So it was I wouldn't say it was a sketchy result because I think they deserved the win, but they did try their best to throw it away. And yeah, it's just as there's issues at PSG, there's issues at Monaco, there's issues at Lyon, there's issues at Marseille, and I think it's a huge summer for them. But as Mo said, I think the problem is that if they don't qualify for the Champions League, they don't have the money that's guaranteed from coming from that. And I agree that possibly because of a slightly misjudged transfer policy the last couple of years, they're not going to bring in that much money from player sales, which means that we struggle to see what kind of players they can bring in. Possibly long term, if the fans are willing to sort of accept a couple of lean years, maybe that's a good thing. If Marseille sort of do what they haven't particularly done in recent years and sort of really focus on their youth policy, I think by all accounts they've got a few decent players coming through. Maybe even if it's because they've got no choice, those players are given more chances. Possibly that will bear fruit in 2-3 years, and they could sort of become a little bit more like a Lyon or a Rennes, for example. But whoever it is who's dictating the transfers has got a really, really difficult summer ahead. I think there's a lot of players who need to leave, and I do struggle to see how they can be replaced by not I don't want to say upgrades, but some decent players need to come in, and I don't know what they're going to be able to buy with the funds that are available.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting thing come the summer for all of Ligue 1, really, that 2 of the giants are really in a transitional mood. PSG looking for other things. Lille will have to make big changes. It's all gearing up to be something we'll have to keep an eye on for certain. That's all that we have time for this evening. My thanks to Jess, Mo, and all of you listening at home. Do join us for the preview show, which will be back on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.